You're joining another episode of BeyondU, the podcast of Oklahoma Wesleyan University, discussing faith, culture, and the intersection of all of that with higher education. Our guest today is Leslie Clingenpeel. She leads a ministry called The Spring in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It is a ministry that is focused on deliverance from trafficking, sexual trafficking, abuse, domestic abuse, and is the only faith-based organization like it in the state of Oklahoma, certified by the Attorney General's office. In this conversation, we talk about the effects of working with victims of trafficking, those who are abused, those who are put in places that God never intended. It's a great conversation to be able to reflect on the fact that this topic is real. There are people who deal with this every day, and Leslie's and her organization are at the front lines of trying to react to providing shelter, providing safety, providing life for people who have been victimized and life has been taken away. It's a serious conversation. It has some sensitive content in it, dealing with sex trafficking and domestic violence and abuse. And so we want you to know that. It is an episode that involves lots of good conversation and even some ways that you can help in being involved in your community. So we welcome you to BeyondU from Oklahoma Wesleyan University. Leslie, thanks for joining us today, and thank you for speaking in chapel on our campus, and people can check that out on our YouTube channel at Oklahoma Wesleyan University. Could you tell us a little bit about what God has you doing these days?
Yeah, that's a loaded question. Thanks, Jim, for having me on campus. I was always excited to speak here to the students. So right now, as we speak, I have the privilege to serve as the executive director at The Spring. So we are the Oklahoma's only certified faith-based organization certified by the Oklahoma Attorney General's office to provide services to victims of domestic violence, human trafficking, sexual assault, and stalking. So we have an emergency crisis shelter, the second largest in the state actually, and we provide just comprehensive wraparound services to victims of that demographic. And I also serve as the leadership co-chair for the Oklahoma Coalition Against Trafficking, so the statewide collaborative effort to just increase capacity of services and access to services to victims of domestic violence. And I also serve as the vice president of the board for Place of Refuge Global, which is a nonprofit organization in West Africa that serves vulnerable and at-risk children.
Wow. You're not involved in very much.
Not at all. And I have 3 kids and a husband. So, I stay busy.
Well, tell us a little bit about, I know you've worked on master's degrees here from the University in Strategic Leadership, which would fit a lot of different vocations and callings. How do you get started, and where did you gain your interest for getting involved in trying to provide freedom to those who are trafficked in sexuality or domestic abuse, and all of the bondage that goes with that? What sparked that interest?
Yeah, so to give you the short version, we have to kind of go way back. I actually became a Christian as an adult. I was not raised in a Christian faith-based home, and I became a Christian as an adult when I was 24 years old.
Praise the Lord.
And when I found that freedom in Christ myself, I jumped right into the church and the work of the ministry. Served every chance I got, and through that process really had several people in my life, spiritual mentors, I would say, that just called out some giftings in me and really encouraged me in some of the things and the qualities that they saw in me. And so in 2013, I got randomly called by a church that we were attending, asking if I'd be interested in taking a job at the church. And just in like administrative type things, I was staying at home at that time, working part-time. And I just jumped in. One of my spiritual gifts is faith. And so I just kind of called my husband and said, hey, I really think I should do this. And he's like, I support you. Let's do it.
That's great.
So I jumped on to staff in a part-time capacity in 2013. And the church we were at that I went on staff at was working on launching a ministry in Africa. That was one of the initiatives. And through that long process, I was on staff at that church for 7 years. I went through the process of really feeling called and stretched, specifically in leadership. And just full transparency, I was on staff at a church that didn't promote women in leadership.
Okay.
But still felt called to that church, right? And so I went through a process with a spiritual mentor to really help me walk through, what is my calling? What am I called to? What are those kind of divine burdens that the Lord has given me? What are those giftings? And through that process, I felt called to go back to school. That was actually where I went to finish my bachelor's degree as an adult here at Oklahoma Wesleyan. So that's part of my story. Got my undergrad in ministry and leadership. Walked that out. It didn't make any sense. I didn't have any kind of career path, right? But I felt like the Lord very clearly said, you need to go back to school. So I did that, pursued some training in ministry, and then helped to launch the orphanage in Africa. But through this whole process, to keep this short, me working with a spiritual mentor, walking through my gifts, all of those things really led me to define who God made me to be and what he's called me to. And I determined that it is to advocate for the marginalized and to bring justice and restorative freedom to the marginalized, specifically women and children. And an opportunity presented itself for me to step into the Spring, which is where I'm at now. I'm an agency that serves marginalized women and children in bondage. And I stepped into that opportunity while I was I had finished my bachelor's degree. And for the next step at that organization, the executive director position or any kind of leadership position required a master's degree.
Okay.
And I was like, wow, I'm going to go back to school. Okay. I loved Oklahoma Wesleyan. I know most people don't get their undergrad and their master's at the same place, but I loved this place and saw the program of strategic leadership. And so I stepped into that out of faith. Again, had no reason to believe I would step into executive director position. I was just on staff in that position. And while I was in the cohort, our organization went through a transition of leadership, and I was actually appointed as interim executive director, finished my master's degree during that process, and then was appointed executive director. So long story short, I went through a lot of challenges, had to really rely on the Lord for those very next steps, and went through a lot of just spiritual defining of what my calling is and what it is I'm called to. So now I have that filter. A lot of opportunities present themselves now, but I know clearly that if it doesn't align with what I feel like the Lord has called me to, then I don't need to step into that. So
I love it that you're a calling person and grateful that you answered the call to salvation and repentance and church work and work in Africa. You're working in the state of Oklahoma.
Yeah.
And oddly enough, I was recently with the governor in a meeting. And so tell us what the Spring does. And I'll preface that with something I just heard, I think on the radio. I still listen to the radio. I'm old school.
Well, same.
Right? So it said that Oklahoma right now has the highest domestic violent rate in all of our country.
yes.
So the Spring is engaged in this. You said you were appointed by the Attorney General, if I heard you right.
Yes, we're certified through the
And
Attorney
so,
General's office.
okay, certified through that. What does the Spring do? How are you engaged in even locally? We'll get to maybe human trafficking in a second,
Sure.
but domestic violence, offering freedom, offering protection, safety, getting people out of situations that are terrible. What does your organization do to meet that need?
Yeah, so we are a reactive service provider. So we are reacting to someone who's coming out of those situations and providing that safety, right? A safe space, on-site mental health counseling, legal services for protective orders. We're providing all of that when someone is fleeing from their crisis situation. You mentioned that it just came out in the news that we are number one in the nation for occurrences of domestic violence, but we are also number two in the nation for women killed by their intimate partners.
Wow.
We're holding the number one and number two spaces in not a good space to hold, right? So we are really taking these people, women and men, we do serve men, out of a situation to where they maybe are one phone call away from homicide. You guys have seen the news, and we're seeing entire family annihilations by domestic violence abusers, right? I mean, we're at a tipping point. So we are serving reactively in that space we're their last resort. I mean, it's life or death when they call us, right? But we also really have stepped up in the last few years to be just passionate and committed to preventative services, to awareness, to education, to training, to making sure that if someone is experiencing this situation or if they know someone who is, that they're identifying those red flags much before it's getting to homicide or murder, suicide, or the things that we're seeing. And part of that work is working at a state level with our legislators and our representatives to really speak into common sense reform. We just sat in on an interim study that was done on domestic violence and presented at the Capitol by Representative Ford. And so we sit in those spaces to really advocate for victims in this state and to help make sure that the legislation that we're passing isn't unintentionally hurting a victim or isn't unintentionally not penalizing an abuser as they should be. So we get the opportunity to speak into those and help. We don't lobby. We can't lobby. But we do educate and advocate at a state level. And I'm very happy to say that the state of Oklahoma, with all of the data that's coming out, that our reps are really starting to listen and starting to bring us to the table to say, what do we need to do to address this issue in the state? So we get to do some of that outward-facing, public-facing advocacy work.
Great. Do you have an example of how, like, public policy could provide an avenue that would cause harm to a victim or even not enough accountability for an abuser, let's say? Do you have any examples of how that might play out? Because I was curious when you said that. I don't know all the intricacies of public policy and legislation and unintended consequences.
Sure. So one really good example is a piece of legislation that was actually changed recently. I think COVID is like 10 years, so I lose track of my years.
That's right.
I think it was 2 years ago it was changed. Strangulation in the state of Oklahoma up until 2 years ago was not a violent crime.
Really?
It was a misdemeanor crime, nonviolent. And we know that anyone that has been strangled by their abuser, they are about one step away from lethality. It is actually attempted murder. And if we don't have attempted murder in the state of Oklahoma. So strangulation is still a non-85% crime. So how that could cause harm and how it being a nonviolent crime could cause harm is that that person we know is likely to kill their victim, but they're getting out, getting a slap on the wrist and coming out 2 days later and still has control over that victim, has intimidation over that victim. They're not going to testify or press charges because of all of the power and control and obviously physical dynamics to that. So having loose legislation, loose laws and statutes in place for those offenders can cause harm to those victims because they're getting back in the hands of their abusers 2 days after they've been arrested.
Wow.
So that's a good example of how legislation matters.
Yeah, it's so important to know those ins and outs of the categories of law. What would you say to someone, and I know this is diving in pretty deep here, but I think I've talked to a few people that don't think that this exists, that it's just kind of somebody overreacting, especially trafficking. You know, that happens somewhere else. Not in my town. Not in my country. Not in my county. Whatever that comment is, what would you say to them?
Wow, that is a really loaded question. I would say it is happening, both domestic violence and human trafficking. Just the statistics that are coming out about domestic violence in the state of Oklahoma, obviously that's there. Another touch point, I mean, I can just throw out some quick statistics for you. Another touch point for domestic violence, that a study that came out earlier this year, the Tulsa Housing Authority and Away Home for Tulsa Council put out a point-in-time survey to survey people who are experiencing homelessness. So we're seeing an increase in people experiencing homelessness in the Tulsa area community and in Oklahoma. And 54% of those people who said they were at that point in time experiencing homelessness, 54% of them cited that it was because of the result of domestic or sexual violence.
Wow.
So people are more willing to be homeless and to remove their families and literally live on the streets than be in the incredibly violent, traumatic situations that they are. So more than half of the people experiencing homeless cited domestic violence and sexual violence as a result of their homelessness. And another study on human trafficking, this is hard information to give, and almost every time I give it, people just look at me like, you can't be telling the truth. Most of the trafficking we experience in the state of Oklahoma is not the movie Taken. It's not someone being followed at Hobby Lobby and thrown in their van. It's not somebody being taken by a stranger. It's what we call interfamilial trafficking. So it's someone in the person's family who's trafficking them, whether it's a uncle, whether it's a cousin. There was a study just published by Dr. Jenny Allert, one of the first in the nation of its kind on familial trafficking, specifically to children. And the average age of children being trafficked is 12. And
Wow.
that relates to Texas and Oklahoma. We've done some research congruent to hers to see if our stats are showing what her research showed. So the average age is 12 years old, and the almost 70% of the child respondents who were being trafficked, as they dug into the case, it revealed that almost 70% of them were being trafficked by their biological mother. So it is
Wow.
moms who were sexually abused as a child, who were raised in this type of environment, who have been taught this is how you survive. This is how we survive as a family. This is how we pay our rent. This is how we get groceries. So it's truly a response, generational response, generational trauma. And it's mothers and family members who are grooming these children and who are using them as a means to an end, really. So it's happening in Oklahoma. That's what it looks like in Oklahoma. Truly heartbreaking and evil to hear, but it's here. And another thing we're seeing a spike in is boyfriending. Trafficker is going to coerce or groom somebody on social media or in some type of romantic relationship, gain their trust, isolate them from their family, and then they're going to push them into the commercial sex industry. So we're seeing a lot of that happen with college students with stable support homes.
Yeah.
So it's happening.
Wow. So an economic driver, more than not, perhaps.
Yes.
It's not isolated to Oklahoma and Texas.
Nope.
It's worldwide.
Yes.
So you're working in this every day. You're trying to keep your head up,
Yeah.
keep a smile on your face.
Yeah.
You're dealing with devastating accounts. You meet victims, I'm sure. You advocate for them. You're called out in the middle of the night to perhaps help someone to relocate and provide them with clothing for the next day because they left everything all of a sudden because
Yeah.
of this abusive situation. How do you do it?
Well, that's a great question. And truly, it sounds cliche, but it's that my hope and my anchor is in the Lord. And I know that I've spent a lot of time with the Lord knowing that this is my calling. And so I always just have to, do I want to quit sometimes? Yes.
Yeah.
My goodness, yes. Like, I think, to put it candidly, like, I could go work in corporate America, make a whole lot more money, and be able to clock out at 5 o'clock, right? Like,
Yeah.
But I have to always go back to the last time that I knew that the Lord said, you're supposed to be here. And if he hasn't told me to move, I'm not moving. So that's one way. The other way, though, is, man, I have to remember that I'm not called to save anyone. Jesus has already done that.
Yep.
I don't have to carry the burden of conquering this evil on my own. I don't have to carry the burden if I don't just save this one person. Jesus, that's his burden. He's done that. I can be free of that.
Yeah.
And so my job is simply to show up every single day with my best self, walk in step with the Spirit, and steward the one person or the one conversation or the one open door that he's put in front of me that day. And if I've done that, I can go home and go to sleep and turn it off because I don't have to carry that burden. So I have to truly remember I am nobody's savior. If I left and he took me off the face of the earth tomorrow, he'd call somebody else, some other willing person to step in and do the work.
Yeah.
And so that's truly freeing to know this isn't for me to fix or change. This is for me to steward and walk faithfully in my calling and plant the gospel seed at any space that I can, and then pray that someone else comes along and waters it, and then let the Lord bring the growth. And I can go home and sleep at night.
That's terrific. That's good theology, good Bible. The bumper sticker's right. Jesus saves.
Yeah.
It doesn't have my name, your name, anybody else's name.
Yeah.
And we're to be utilized. Sometimes even in this conversation, a little bit of a different word, but when people are being used and abused in various ways for somebody else's gain or in their fun or their perversion or whatever that is, that we would be utilized as tools. And I'm grateful that you're willing to do that.
Yeah.
And we need more that are willing to do that and answer the call. So coupled with that, you're working as a certified agency by the state. You're a personal believer and follower in Jesus Christ. Does the Spring have a Christian mission to it? And how do you do that in being associated with the state and carrying that out? Where do you have to be a little smart and careful? Not that you're trying to hide anything. But talk to us a little bit about incorporating your faith into the agency that you're leading, as well as working with the state. How does that happen?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I always laugh and say, like, I know the Lord has called me to ministry work, and specifically nonprofit. And I joke and say I could go to corporate America and make more money, but I won't. Don't feel called to not a faith-based organization. So yes, the Spring is the only certified faith-based organization in the state of Oklahoma that's certified to provide services to victims of human trafficking, domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking. So we hold that space. We are the only one in the state. Honestly, everything we do is driven by our faith-based mission. It's written into our bylaws. It's written into our policies. I mean, it's there. If you walk into our shelter right now, there's scriptures on the wall. There's our core values that we're Christ-centered. It's there. Our staff buy into it and believe it, but our services are voluntary. So our services are person-centered, trauma-informed, and voluntary services. So we do not require anybody to believe what we believe or to attend Bible study.
So the people you're serving, you don't require some kind of faith commitment out of them.
Not at all. You can ascribe to any faith or no faith at all. We truly believe that a person is made in the image of God, and they deserve safety, shelter, and love regardless of what they ascribe to. And we're not going to ask you or push that on you for you to come and receive Christ's love. Christ-like care from us.
Kind of like Jesus, right?
Kind of like Jesus. Yes.
He met the human condition.
Yes, absolutely. So, first of all, we have to stay prayed up. I mean, we know that there is a spiritual enemy that does not want us planting any of those seeds with people who are at their darkest space. People whose spiritual religion has been used against them. Spiritual abuse is rampant in the clients that we serve. A wife maybe has been told by a well-meaning pastor that just maybe be a better wife, or God hates divorce, right?
You just have to take it. You're in this situation, you just have to live with it.
Yes, and so we have to remember that God's word has been twisted and misused against those people for a space of power and control. And so we would never want to further taint that with someone. Right. So while our staff and we infiltrate our worldview and Jesus into every single thing that we do, it's not required of anyone to receive that. But we see there's a joke amongst our Baptist friends that we've baptized more people on site at the Spring than a lot of Baptist churches have in a year. So our staff members, we have the opportunity to lead people to Christ. And if they do that and they lead them into the next step of baptism, they get to baptize them. So those things are happening. We just have to recognize that not everyone understands that. And, we get asked hard questions. So we have to be very careful with that. Yeah. We don't hide it, but it's offered, but we don't require it because we believe they deserve our love. They deserve dignity, respect, no matter where they're at in that space. Yeah. Regarding the state, there's a lot of, I could do a whole podcast on this. There's a lot of misconceptions and a lack of understanding of faith-based organizations and the support that they're able to get from the government. Okay. There are funding opportunities and spaces that you can sit in with your nonprofit and your faith-based background. You can still hire to your mission. You can do all of those things as long as you're not being discriminatory in who you're serving.
Okay.
you can do that. And so we honestly have a lot of freedom. And we talk about being faith-based, and all of everybody we engage with at the state level understands that. And we know our limitations. They've very clearly lined that out. We're not going to walk down a path that would make us forfeit that. We just trust that God would provide that provision from somewhere else.
Yeah.
But there are opportunities that faith-based organizations can capitalize on and still do the work of the ministry.
Yeah, just to affirm that, in my conversation with the governor of the state, Governor Stitt, recently, I don't even know why we got on the topic. It wasn't this particular topic, but he was talking about bringing about change in every community. And he looked at me and he said, it's going to take Christian universities like Oklahoma Wesleyan. It's going to take good Bible-believing churches, and it's going to take these agencies that are faith-based to turn these communities around.
Yes.
When you look for morals, when you look for good. I mean, he went on and on and on,
Yes.
and was I don't think he was just blowing smoke. I think he genuinely means that, and we know that. And our issue is we need to get more involved in that and engaged in that. And, the young adults of our university are interested in what Jesus said was genuine Christianity, real Christianity. So the poor, the outcast, the widow, the orphan, even those who need a drink, who are naked, who need meals, who need food. And they actually grow weary, even at a very young age, of everything being about myself.
Yeah.
And we all know what everybody says about young adults. They said it about me when I was 18 as well. You're too entitled, you're too self-serving, you don't care about anybody else. What do you see, maybe even in the victims, but definitely in those that you might engage with that are 18 to 22, when they look at an issue like this? Some of them have been abused. Some of them are victimized. Some of them may have been trafficked. I don't know. But what do you see in them? And is that something that keeps you going in your work?
Oh, man. I always say if we want to keep the spring in our movement alive, we got to engage the young people. They aren't... Yes, we live in a selfie culture, right?
Yeah.
Like, we're all guilty of it. Yeah. And that just goes back to the nature of the fall. We're all prideful. Look at me. Right. I'm going to take and touch and see and grab and, but I would say they're passionate. They are social justice warriors. Yep. And I believe that we are called to the kingdom come. And part of that is restoring justice, right? As the Lord meant it to be. And so I see a generation of young people who are hungry to get behind a cause. They may not be able to give you money, but they will make you go viral on their Instagram if they believe in something. Yep. And so I see a generation of young people and young adults that are just eager to make a difference, to find specifically our faith-based community. We all know we have a purpose. We just need to find a way to carry it out. And so if you give a young person a platform to make a difference and speak up for something that's worthy, they're going to step up every single time and do it. And so we see a lot of students at the spring coming out from ORU, places like that they're just, what do I do? Tell me what to do. How do I talk about this? Can I practice my graphic design on your social media? That if you give them a platform, they're going to step up. And that's what we see with our young people time and time and time again. They
can be utilized,
yes,
right? And the skills
absolutely,
and the gifts that God's given them. And for older people as well.
Yeah.
And so what kinds of things, when you're in this day in and day out, and you think about compassion fatigue?
Yeah.
You preached a little bit about this in our chapel recently, and what keeps you going. I've asked you that question already, but it's a real thing where you become fatigued, you become calloused, you can really lose your purpose. It's just overwhelming. I think you gave a quote. What was the quote you gave today earlier about the economic impact of trafficking?
$150 billion industry globally.
Billion with a B.
With a B. $150 billion.
Worldwide?
That is worldwide. It is second to drugs and weapons, but it is very, very quickly gaining the first place spot as the most lucrative industry in the world.
$150 billion a year.
So there is a demand for humans as a product.
Unbelievable.
Yes.
So when you think about that, you think about how many victims there are even in your county, your street maybe, and you don't even know it. It seems impossible.
Yeah. Yeah.
how do we tackle that? How is it something that keeps you going? And it may be a different kind of answer, but surely you get tired. Surely you want to quit. You've already said that.
Yes.
When somebody looks at it and says it's just too overwhelming, I don't even know where to start. I don't know how to keep going. Mm-hmm. I know that your faith keeps you going.
Sure.
But that sometimes seems inadequate to some.
Yeah.
So I'm not here to pick on anybody's faith. I agree with you. But what is it?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's a loaded question. You spoke about compassion fatigue, and I would just say social work and the social services type industry is one of the industries that you just see the most turnover and the most burnout happening, because you are up front, you're helpers, and you're giving and you're giving and you're giving and you're giving. And as you say, if you're seeing it every day, we're seeing these statistics come out about being number 1 and number 2 in the nation. It would be easy to say, well, I'm not even making any kind of difference. What are we even doing here?
Right.
But that's why I would keep going back to say, we have to remember that we are only one person, and all we can do is all we can do. Mm-hmm. And that has to be okay, and that has to be good enough. Mm-hmm. You have to be able to have a support system and give each other permission to go, I'm feeling apathetic about this, and I am going to cause further harm to this person, and I'm going to step away. You have to have that permission, So I have a team of people around me that's our culture. That is, we get it. We're humans, and we can be desensitized, and we can be apathetic, and we call each other out on that. So having people around you to say, we need you here for a long time, so I need you to step away, let me take on this caseload, something like that. But I would also say, it's kind of yes, I have to bring faith back into it, because I think it's every piece of it. But specifically with the anti-trafficking movement, we're so new in this movement. It wasn't even a law on the fabric of our nation's books until the year 2000 that it was illegal to sell a person for sex. So we're only 23 years into this fight. Wow. We have made barely any progress, right? Because of how early we are into the fight, because of how people don't understand what trafficking actually looks like, so we're acting like it's not happening. So it can be very daunting to be like, I'm going to commit my life's work to this, and I may not ever see any kind of real change. But I think that's okay. And that keeps me going, in that if I can continue to push forward and blaze a trail, there's going to be people behind me like Joshua with Moses that has to step in and continue it. And that is enough for me, because now that I know better, I have to do better. And it keeps me going to say, I can't just walk away. I can't do everything, but I can help one person, and one person matters to God. So if I help and influence and impact and bring freedom to one person, Amen, that matters to God. And so just remembering and waking up every day with, what's my one thing? It's the starfish thing. Starfish. It's the starfish thing.
Yeah. I helped this one.
Yes, I helped this one.
Yeah.
And I maybe this is what's crazy about our field, and what I think I would love anybody wanting to go into the helping field, ministry, social services, that they need to remember. You come out like guns a-blazing. God has called me to this. I've got my degree. I'm trained. I'm equipped. I'm ready. I'm going to change the world.
Yeah.
And then you go start serving these people, and you spend 2 full days with them, literally every waking moment, because their issues are so complex or something. And then a week later, they return to their abuser.
Yeah.
You're humbled pretty quickly about what you think is success.
Yeah.
So you have to redefine success, and you have to remember, did I help this person? And did I plant a seed of safety, a seed of love, a seed of truth? And all you can do is all you can do. Yeah. So if I've done that today, then I have been successful. And if you just keep that focus and don't try to conquer the world, I think that's how you just keep going. I'm reminded of the scripture, the word is a lamp to your feet and a light to your path. It's one step at a time. I can't show you the whole thing, because you won't be able to handle it.
You wouldn't want to go down that road.
You wouldn't want to go down that road. So just remember that one person matters. And that's the one thing that we can get tied up in statistics, numbers served, outcomes. A lot of our funders and foundations want to ask, what are your numbers? What are your outcomes? And that matters, because they want to make sure they're being good stewards.
Sure.
But if you get wrapped up in that, that's where you lose sight of the person, the humanity behind it.
Yeah.
So to keep going, I just remember, who am I helping? what one law am I changing?
Right.
What one, person am I planting real hope and freedom with? And if I've done that, and if I do that and wake up every day with that mindset, it's much easier to keep going.
Yeah, I think of modern day slavery and reflect on slavery in days gone by where humans were sold for labor or work or whatever. Somebody had to stand up. Somebody had to plant the seed.
Yeah.
You have, even in legislation, somebody saying this is wrong.
Yeah.
And it needs to be corrected.
Yeah.
And that takes a lot of courage.
Yeah.
Takes a lot of energy. And I'm glad you mentioned the fact that sometimes these very victims, because they know what's normal, to be free is abnormal for some, and they go right back in. And that's what they know is normal in their life. And it's so sad to watch and has to be discouraging. And so if somebody wanted to be involved, maybe with your agency, the Spring, or maybe in some other way, to take a look around their community. People who watch this podcast, maybe from all over the world, actually, not just Oklahoma, not just Bartlesville, Oklahoma. What would you tell them? What would you say? How would they get started? What kinds of things they can do? I would love to lead that conversation with praying.
Yeah.
That we need to pray for deliverance. We need to pray that the enemy would be defeated.
Yeah.
We need to pray that worshiping self and our own fleshly desires would be given to God and conquered. But practically, and praying being number one, what would be some ways if somebody wanted to get involved with your agency or beyond that, how would they do that?
Yeah, so I would say start with education. Find a way to educate yourself. I mentioned we're the only faith-based certified agency in the state. There's only 2 other certified agencies in the state specifically for human trafficking certified by the AG. So Oklahoma, I would say find and connect with your 3 certified agencies. That would be us, the Spring. Domestic Violence Intervention Services is also in Tulsa, and then Dragonfly Home in Oklahoma City area. We all 3 have trainings and education. Get educated on what this issue actually looks like.
Become informed.
Become
of what's
informed.
Going on.
Yes, because you cannot. We can unintentionally share myths and misconceptions all over social media that is not helping us. It's actually taking people's eyes away from the actual issue because we're sharing something that it doesn't actually look like. So I would say get informed and educated on what it actually looks like in your communities. Go talk to, some of your medical professionals. Talk to law enforcement. Talk to your legislators. What are we seeing? Talk to us, the agencies, and get yourself educated first. And then that's how you can help. I would also say just don't think that you have to be on the front line doing something to make a difference. You may be the ambassador at your kid's school, talking to kids about safe online use, about talking to teachers and your educators about bringing healthy relationship curriculum to your school. There are all kinds of ways that you can be an advocate in the movement without being a direct service on the front lines service provider. That takes highly trained professionals, and not everyone can do that. But everyone can do something. So if you want to get involved with our organization, there's multiple ways. Our website, thespringok.org, can share all the ways that you can volunteer, that you can financially support, that you can host a community awareness event at your church. I've trained pastors on how to address allegations of abuse within their congregation. There are all kinds of ways that you could open up the door for us to come and help speak, educate, train, bring awareness. So those are a few things I would say. Of course, I would mimic or back what you said about prayer. This is a spiritual battle. This is not against flesh and blood. And just pray for those of us who are on the front lines. It is heavy, heavy, heavy work. Pray for our legislators, that they would open the door to the voices of the people who are doing this work to bring change, that they would be receptive to that. And also, I would just say provision, for those of us and for the victims who desperately need help standing on their own 2 feet.
Very good. What do we do if somebody comes to us and says, I'm being abused, I'm being trafficked? What is an ordinary citizen, neighbor, family member? What do we do?
So I think you first say, practically, I'm very sorry that that's happening to you. I believe you. think that's key.
Yep.
There are a lot of people who are not believed or underplay what's
Oh,
actually
come
happening.
on. You're overstating
Yes.
it.
Yes.
You don't like the person.
Yes. Was it just this time? All of those things that we hear. What were you wearing at that party when you were raped?
Yeah.
You know, those kind of things. So first of all, I'm sorry that happened to you. I believe you. And there are people who are here to help you. And then there are multiple hotlines. So we run a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week crisis hotline that you can call for domestic violence, human trafficking, sexual assault, or stalking if that person wants to receive help and services. So our hotline number is 918-245-4075. There's also national and state hotline numbers for both domestic violence and human trafficking. I would say if you suspect any of that, we would rather you over-report and it be nothing than under-report. So those hotlines are set up by people who their entire job is to investigate a tip. If you were to call and say, I suspect this. So let's say you see something at a truck stop or a gas station or something that you suspect. Don't go intervene if that person hasn't come up to you and asked, but definitely report and give as many details as you can. So the National Human Trafficking Hotline, National Domestic Violence Hotline, I can get the numbers out to make sure that you guys have access to those. But I would say call those lines. Let the people who are trained and equipped to do that work. You just be a support and help connect them to those services.
So believing them, listening to them, trying to get them directed in the right way. We don't need to try to fix it. It could be a lot deeper than just this one incident or involve many, many people.
Yes.
And actually perhaps put you in danger.
You and the victim.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. So that is the one thing that I always say. Please do not insert yourself into the situation. It can be a very, very volatile situation for a victim if the abuser, the trafficker, realizes that somebody has caught on. That can be a very dangerous situation for them and yourself. So just make sure they know if it's a safe space for you to do so, that there are people who understand this, who are there to help you. Offer them the number for that, or help them to call that. If it's not a safe space, you call and report yourself and give as much information as you can. I will say, if you suspect that there is abuse of a child, everyone in the state of Oklahoma is a mandatory reporter, so you are mandated to report any suspicion of child abuse to DHS. So I would say that if it's a child, you must report. It is a crime if you do not.
In the state of Oklahoma.
In the state of Oklahoma.
And that varies by state.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, because I know there are people listening everywhere. But
correct.
Yes, in the state of Oklahoma, if you are an adult over the age of 18, you are mandated to report any suspicion of child abuse.
Okay. Good. And rightly so.
Yes.
We don't want our children being taken advantage of and overpowered and abused in any way.
Right.
You've had a few students on our campus ask you how they could be involved with your ministry. So students who are listening, young adults, anywhere, what advice would you give? They're compassionate about these things. They want to see their friends be well and do well. I actually think this young adult generation is rather unique compared to others in that they have compassion for their friends like other generations have not had.
Yes.
I explained to them also sometimes it goes too far, right? Where they just tolerate everything. They haven't drawn a line on anything.
Yes, boundaries are good.
That's right. So if our students at the university or beyond wanted to get involved, they're watching this, could be with you directly or any other agency, what would they do?
Yeah. I said it earlier. I think that I will just speak for myself. My husband and several of my friends joke and call me grandma when it comes to technology. I'm the worst at technology.
Join the club. I must be grandpa.
Yeah. So it's not a thing for me. And I have a lot of young people on my staff that help me with that. But I would say.
I call it Snapgram and FaceTick.
Yes, the Facebooks, whatever it is.
Sure.
But I would say we have a generation coming up that has a level of expertise in technology, a level of access, and things that some of us that are older don't. And I think that there's space in this movement to use some of those talents and gifts that some of us, the older generation in the workforce, doesn't have, right? So like at my organization, come run our social media. We would love for you to do that. Come do some graphic designer marketing, all the ways in which you're looking to get your degree or pursue a field in, there's a way to use it in a nonprofit. We don't have big marketing departments and execs, right? Like the executive director and the operations director sometimes are the janitor. So
Yeah.
if you're wanting to pursue any kind of degree that would touch an organization, I think there's a way that you can use those gifts and skills in the movement through different avenues, specifically through the organizations that are doing the work. We love interns. We love to have people, law students that come in
Right.
and research, because I'm not an expert of the law, but I have to know a lot
Right.
about the law, right?
Accounting students.
Yes,
that are
accounting
doing
students,
budgets.
HR students.
maybe even some in the medical field.
Medical
nursing.
field. We actually I'm just trying to say if I can say this because it's not public yet, but we are actually launching the first ever St. Francis Warren Clinic inside of a domestic violence and human trafficking shelter ever. So
Okay.
St. Francis and Warren Clinic have partnered with us, and they're opening a clinic that will be inside of our shelter that only our clients will have access to.
Wow.
For acute medical care needs, child vaccines, sexual assault nursing exams, all of those things will be right in the safety of our shelter.
That's terrific.
So their medical care and access to immediate, affordable medical care is a huge barrier to the clients we
Right,
serve.
right.
So yes, the medical field. I go out and train, and I've trained St. Francis and their employees and have helped launch their human trafficking response program at their campus. So there are a lot of ways. If you want to go into donor development and fundraising, I do a lot of that myself, and I do a lot of our grant writing, but we would love to have young people who are interested in doing that
Right.
on our team to be taught and led and to know how to do that. And so there are so many ways you can get involved. Don't just think going out and physically encountering someone face to face. Think, how has God wired you and what's he calling you to? And then find a way to use those gifts for the advancement of the movement.
That's great. And maybe even cleaning the CEO's office.
Come on, you can come clean my office.
That's
yes.
great. Yeah, it all takes it all.
Absolutely.
Okay, so a couple more questions.
Yeah.
One would be, what do you wish someone would ask you about this issue?
Oh, man. That's catching me off guard. What do I wish someone would ask me about this issue? Ooh. This is a good one. I wish if I encountered every person and they asked me this question, who can I introduce you to in my circle of influence that would have the power to open a seat at a table, open a door, introduce you to someone who could unlock resources, political power, influence. That's what we need. We need people with influence and people who are in a position to make a change, to be introduced to those of us who are doing this work so that then they can help us to make this change. So I think that's the question I would ask, because I know a lot of people, but I only know so many people.
Right.
And I need more people, and we need more people in this field who are passionate about this issue and are in a position to make and create lasting change.
Right.
So I would want everybody I met to ask me who they can introduce me to.
Excellent. It's one life at a time, the starfish mentality. I made a difference for this one.
Yeah.
But a $150 billion business isn't affected much by one person. We've got to have multiples of that around the world.
Yes.
And to introduce and to share the information, let people know what the needs are. And we're not just talking about money.
Right. No.
We're talking about advocacy. We're talking
Yes.
about working with legislators. We're talking about people in public office.
Yes.
Taking the right stands and having the courage to
Yes.
stand up to what some might say is an economic funnel
Yes.
to keep things going, and stand up and say no.
Yes.
We're
Absolutely.
not going to stand for this.
Absolutely. And providing the care and the support and the emotional support and the spiritual support and being face to face and crying with those victims and hearing those stories is absolutely invaluable. And there are people doing that. But if we want real change, we have to swim upstream, and we have to be proactive, and we have to have people, to your point, standing in powerful spaces saying, we hear you, we see you, and not on our watch, not on our backyard. And so I think the upstream preventative legislative advocacy piece is what I am the most passionate about, because I believe that's where the most change is going to come related to the issue. Of course, Jesus and salvation and all the things
Sure.
is the real change. But if we're going to make a difference as a nation, we need people upstream taking this issue seriously and saying, not on our watch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good. One last question.
Yeah.
What brings you hope? What gives you hope today?
Today, well, of course, Jesus.
There you go.
But truly, I am incredibly encouraged. I always say this. The Lord has taught me this. I always say I'm not often wrong, but I'm usually early. And I've had to learn that I sometimes can get out ahead of the Lord. I have been feeling just this urgency about specifically the human trafficking movement for a while, and it seemed like nobody was listening. Nobody was taking it seriously. Over the last 18 months, that has completely changed, and people are talking about it. I'm here sitting with you talking about it. We're having these conversations about this, and more people are stepping up because it's the right thing to do. And so I am joyful today that I'm getting to see some of this really take off and it really become an issue that the country's, coming around. And that gives me hope, because I know that there are less than 1% of victims in human trafficking to date are rescued.
Wow. Less than 1%?
Less than 1%
are rescued.
Wow. Or brought out of their situation.
Yeah.
And so it gives me hope that in my lifetime, we'll get to see that number increase. And it may only increase to 2%, but hey, in a scope of a $150 billion industry, 2% is a lot of people. So that's what gives me hope and joy today, is knowing that the Lord is doing something. We know the end of the story, and hopefully I'm going to get to see some of it come to fruition in my lifetime. But if not, I'll just keep working and trust that somebody behind me will.
You're still doing the right
behind
thing
me.
every day.
Yeah.
Leslie, thank you for joining us on BeyondU. This is part of our conversation of faith and culture and the intersection with higher education as well. And we're grateful for the education that you've earned here.
Yeah, I am too.
And hopefully that is something that you can utilize every day and put into practice. Thank you for giving yourself to genuine Christianity.
Yeah.
And sometimes even putting your life on the line, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And God bless you in your work, your family, and everyone deserves the deliverance that God can offer.
Amen.
Even the physical deliverance from a case and a situation that God never intended to happen. And we just are so appreciative of your work and want to encourage you to keep going.
Thank you. Well, it's an honor to be here. It's an honor to do this work, and I'll do it until the Lord says stop. So thanks for having me here, and thank you to my Oakwoo family. Love you guys, really. My education here and experience has been invaluable to my career, so I appreciate it.
We're proud to have you in the Oakwoo family.
Yeah, thank you.